Matt, how are you doing today?
I'm well, thank you, and thank you for having me on. I appreciate it, Dylan.
Good. It's good to have you on. I know we connected a little bit before. We chatted it up, and your interests really lie in politics. Can you tell me a little bit about that? How did you get started in that?
Surely, yeah. Actually, I lived in Massachusetts and then in Maine for a little while
Okay.
and got involved with some of if you know the political structure, there's a thing called a central committee. It's sort of the localist version of the Democratic Party, and there, every county has one.
Hmm.
And started getting involved with the more local aspects of government. And I was raised, however, in down in Maryland. And when I returned there, I started getting more involved with the Montgomery County Central Committee. And through that, started meeting other people and uh, other folks and in other positions. And there was a gentleman who wanted to run for the county council, and he liked the things I was doing and asked me to join his campaign as his campaign manager. And through that, I had a very positive experience, and we were able to win the race. And so he brought me on as his aide. So I was involved with sort of the local party politics, and then became campaign manager, then became an aide, and so kept a hand in, so that wherever I traveled, wherever I've gone, I've always been involved with the central committees, central Democratic central committees, and kept a hand in that way, no matter what else I'm doing. And so the local after he was uh, taken out of the county committee, um, I'm sorry, the county government, I wound up working for some people on the state level of government because they had seen me doing things with him.
Right.
And so I just built from there. And then I left the state. I went to a couple of different places. But as I say, everywhere I went, I stayed active and have always had a hand in it on it.
How long have you been doing this?
Ooh, uh, it's probably around 20, 25 years.
25 years. Do you think, I know we're in 2021 now, but do you think that there's been any difference between, when you started 25 years ago? And when I say difference, I'm asking more or less for the polarization of everything, just to get on social media and see how polarized everything is. If there's any difference between, today or 25 years ago?
I think so. Yeah, I think that there's certainly a bit more of with the Trump Republican attack mode of everything always being an urgent matter, uh, sort of urgent matter. I think that puts folks in a different frame of mind. And it seems to me that when I started or when I was younger, that there was a lot more just focusing on even on the local level. I think it was just more. There were certainly rivalries,
Yeah.
but I don't recall anything being as sour as things have become. But I also think that that's part of the dynamic of politics. So, here we are, but this is still politics.
Yeah, it makes me really question everything because it's just I feel like we've entered this tribal mentality where people are just picking sides and not going based off policy. It's like, since when did we choose my team over your team? Like, when are we a football game? Like, why are we rooting for my team, hoping my team wins over your team? And it just, for me, it just feels like we all forget that we're playing football at the same time. And the goal of the game is to enjoy the sport and make the sport better for everybody, and not just to win the championship, if that makes sense. And it just feels as though, at least today, examining it, it just it's so sad to see people fight and not be able to discuss things. Like literally, I know one of the major conversations growing up, or one of the the age-old sayings growing up is like, if you don't want conflict, don't talk about politics or religion. It's like, well, that's super true now today. Like, don't talk about politics. Like, because if you're on the right, it's just like you're calling people on the left snowflakes, and if you're on the left, it's like you're calling people on the right racist and bigoted. It's like we can't seem to call or find common ground. It's just, for me, that's just really upsetting, because I know we're all trying to find solutions to similar issues, like, for example, gun control. We're trying to find the solution to, like, how do we stop and reduce gun violence. And both people seem to or both sides tend to have an answer to that. It's just we can't seem to agree or come together long enough to have a discussion about what it should be. Any thoughts?
I do. Well, I do see things slightly different.
Okay.
And that is, I think that concerns over factionalism have always been in American politics. It's been a very long time that if you look back at even the earliest formations of government and politics, you had concerns over that. And
what do you mean by
perhaps some of those concerns weren't so bad or weren't so far off the mark? But you have Madison and some of the founding fathers arguing over, factionalism causing great harm. And then by the time that Jefferson becomes president, there's what would be the definition of factionalism going on, and some pretty rough politics. So I think rough politics has been around as long as, I'm sure if you go back to any form of government, you can go back to ancient Rome and you'll find that their rough form of politics was killing each other. So we haven't reached that point. But
close enough.
You're right. Things can be rough and tumble. And I think that's where that idea of don't talk about politics, don't talk about religion. I think that I don't agree with that. Because I think that that's a way to simply avoid conflict. And I think there's a lot in people that they want to avoid conflict. Yeah. So it's easier to say, let's not even talk about that. The problem is that political structure and government is a way to address those kind of issues, is to address things that are on the edge of conflict. Now, you mentioned, for instance, gun control. I would say that there's a side that's very clearly trying to figure something out, and there's a side that has for several decades now tried to avoid any kind of even common sense solutions just for political gain. I offer that for the past 40 or maybe even 50 years, there has been a concerted effort by the Republicans to undermine the concept of what government is. I mean, since Ronald Reagan's campaign of government is the problem, that the Republicans have worked with that perception because it helps them politically where they don't have solutions to offer. So they go with the emotional, and they go with trying to undermine the concept of even having government while running for political offices to control government. So it's their buy-in is almost, how can we make government fail so we can prove that we were right when we argued government is the problem. So that's part of the disconnect nowadays that I see, is that you've got one side who doesn't know how to handle the change that's occurred over 50 years, and you've got one side who's not looking for how can we find a common ground, how can we find a middle. It's looking for how do we undermine the system.
Right. And we got a couple people tuning in. What's up, Mason, saying we're out here? Can't we all just get along, Dell? Fair. Good point, right?
Oh, it'd be nice, yeah.
Right. So is government the problem?
I don't think it is. I think that it's easy to perceive it, and that's why the Republicans have worked so hard to push that perception. Is it's big, there's a lot going on, there's always there's always, it's easier to build up the concept of a conspiracy, and it is a big thing, therefore it is doing harm, as opposed to it is such a large sector of our lives that it can achieve not only good, but it can do things that will make things better. There's an argument on the Republican side for decades, once again, about how government doesn't provide jobs. Well, actually, government is about a third of the economy. It provides a lot of jobs, and it provides a lot of ways for people to have, from the frontline workers all the way up. Those are all jobs, and to try to exclude them somehow, that's not looking for a middle ground. That's trying to somehow undermine the system.
So then let's start from square one. What is, in your opinion, what is the goal of government? Like, at least in 2021, like what would be the role of government today? Like, why do we even have government?
Sure. Government provides a structure, it provides a safety net, it provides defense, it provides a number of basic ground work that allows for other things to go on. For instance, you hear about government not being a good thing, but it's government that has allowed for a road system, that has allowed for, that's actually a Republican president who promoted the international road system, was Eisenhower. And now he built it because he portrayed it as being part of national defense, that it was that we needed to have roads because that way a military could move more effectively if we were attacked by the Soviets. But the reality is, obviously, commerce picked up on that, and commerce gets things from one place to another, and it needs roads. And then we started using them. We started using them to go travel. You were talking before, when we were talking, you'd mentioned that you'd been to other states. You probably either you flew or you drove, but if you flew, well, government has a role there too. There's regulations that guide what happens with how planes are maintained, and so they're not dropping out of the sky. And there's roads because we have a government. We have a national defense. We have a military because we have a government. So there are some basic.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I just say there's some basic things that we take almost for granted nowadays, and but that's all government work.
So the roads are basically quality of life, right? Like, we would classify that as a quality of life thing. We don't need roads to go do anything important unless it's to get to work or travel or do anything like that. So is the role of government to provide that standard quality of life? Like, I just want to break this down, like, because I'm really trying to piece together, like, what is the role of government in our every day-to-day lives other than making laws? Like, because as far as I'm concerned, like, for example, the war on drugs, I think it's completely stupid. I don't think the government should be like telling us what to do whatsoever with our body. And I think if you want to have drugs in your body, go for it. But I think that should be on the individual. Now, that might be controversial, but I just don't think that should be a sector which the government is involved. So I'm just trying to, in my head, work out, or at least in this conversation, work out, where is the division between individual freedom and whatever is preached in our Constitution versus, what's actually, like, whatever powers that the government has. Like, why do they get to sit up in an office and tell us what I can and couldn't put in my body? You know what I mean? That doesn't make any sense to me.
Sure. Yeah, and it's failed. It's failed miserably. The war on drugs has proven itself that it's not something that is.
One second. No, Del, I don't say you should do drugs. I did not say that. I did not say that. Let's clarify that. Please do not clip that. cancel me, bro. No, please don't. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I just had to address that.
No problem at all. Yeah, and I'll say that too. Please don't use drugs
Yeah.
unless you're prescribed them by a licensed doctor. And
Yes,
you know,
yes.
so, but the war on drugs clearly has been a failure, and it hasn't worked. And the problem is that it's government, in part, works on the political side by appealing to certain groups. And there are groups, whole swaths of voters,
Right.
Seniors in particular, to whom drugs have been portrayed as an evil thing. And then I would say Reagan helped introduce race into that issue. And he made a famous speech in Philadelphia back in the 80s about, I won't use the language he used, but he tied it in with African Americans and how it was destroying inner cities. But we also know that there's a larger percentage of white people who are using them as much as anybody else. But it was an easy target, and it spoke to the people he wanted to speak to when he said that. So there's that whole scary, and that was the whole thing about Nancy Reagan coming out with "Don't do drugs" or just say no.
Right.
Was her big PR thing.
And the DARE program developed, and we all know how successful that was. Gosh.
Exactly. Not only is that not successful, but it's always held up as an example, which is ridiculous.
Right. Well, I'm more of a, I make this term up, I'm more of a social capitalist, which I think capitalism is good in some sectors, in everyday businesses, but I think there are certain programs like our healthcare system, our education, law enforcement that should be brought into the public sector. And for me, you shouldn't have to go to the hospital and pay like $8,000 out of pocket just for a doctor to walk into the room. That's literally speaking from personal experience. And I think that's wrong. And to frame it as, oh, it's a capitalist organization, we're going to profitize on all these things. You get better healthcare out of it, when there's competition. It's just like, no, that's not how it works. Like, that's just not the reality. Like, I get the framing, and I get the model for standard businesses like Target and Walmart. Yeah, that works for me. That makes sense to me. I get the model for negotiating prices when there's more competition. But in terms of healthcare, standard quality of life sectors where, literally people need it throughout their entire life to stay alive. Like capitalism should be used for luxuries. Target, Walmart, Amazon. Cool. I think that would make sense to me. And then for the basics of life, there should be a socialist model. And oh my gosh, people are going to get mad at me. Socialist. Dylan's a socialist. No, I'm not a socialist. But I think that there are things that, we should take care of our own. That's just my philosophy. I think we should take care of our own. And I don't think the capitalist model is working for education systems. I think teachers are incredibly underpaid. I think we need to value them. I think law enforcement does a lot and deals with a lot. And I think we need to, make sure that everybody's taken care of. So Daydreams endorses socialism. Oh man, you're gonna get me hated on both sides, huh?
Well, but I will say this. I will say before the 70s, healthcare was on that model of we're here to take care of people, and we take care of them,
right?
And we make a profit. It was during the 70s that actually under the Nixon administration, where they set up that model of, oh, somebody can make money off of this, so let's change the model and let's make it so that it's a for-profit thing. And a lot of people got really wealthy. Well, but I think you're right. I think it certainly hasn't done anything to make better healthcare.
And I think I would be okay with that if the money wasn't going directly to CEOs and shareholders, stakeholders, if it was actually going to, the nurses that are working their asses off, providing care for these patients, or a little bit of the money is going back to provide patient care for those that, don't have insurance. I think insurance is another huge issue. So I think that there needs to be reform in those sectors that makes it a little bit more socialized. Again, social capitalist here. Republicans, don't kill me. Democrats, don't kill me either. Don't cancel me, okay?
All you need to do is go back to the system that we had before the 70s, and you can get to a healthcare system that is not based on making CEOs of pharmaceutical companies wealthy, and something that will be focused on providing health through the healthcare system, which, I don't know, makes sense to me.
We were just having a conversation, a friend and I, and we were talking about how it's incredibly stupid how somebody in a boardroom of an insurance company can deny somebody a medical procedure because it's not considered an emergency. Like, are you a doctor? Like, are you going to be, telling me, are you the one that's saying that this is not an emergency? Because if you're giving me medical advice, then that would mean that you're a doctor. And since you're obviously not a doctor, then you don't need to be the one providing me medical advice and saying a procedure is not an emergency. I know a friend that their family member, they had to have surgery. They had to have a electronic rods into their, like, surgically implanted into their brain so that they could stop, with these self-destructive behaviors. But since they didn't have a seizure, they didn't have a seizure disorder or any sort of epilepsy, the medical insurance companies denied them that procedure, even though the doctor said it would help. It's like,
that's just crazy to me.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense because the model is based off of a capitalist model, and if it's a liability and they don't need it, then we're not going to pay for it. Well, then why do I have insurance? Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
I'm sorry, the whole medical system pisses me off. If you couldn't tell, it makes me so irritated that we can have countries like Canada and Sweden, have these beautiful models of healthcare, and then you'll get these like fear-mongering propagandas. Oh, but you can't go to the doctor for like 6 months. Yes, for non-medical emergencies.
Right.
If you have a life-threatening condition, bro, you can get into the doctor immediately. They will take you in, no doubt. It's so annoying.
I agree with that. And it's almost every other country. There's you mentioned two of them, but every other industrial country, there are certainly some that it works better than in others, but every industrialized country other than us has it. So,
what do you think of our education system? Well, not K through 12, college.
I think we do it slightly different than many other countries. A lot of countries specifically pick people to go, and so you have a different group of people. So it's hard to compare one to one. It's not apples to apples. And I think in America, there's a lot of, outside of the crazy things like DeFry and University of Phoenix and that kind of stuff, but real serious colleges that a lot of people can get to it. I think that from after World War II, where there was the Bill of Rights for military personnel to get help to go to college to re-educate, I think that was a boon to the country. And so I think that shows the more people who get an education, the better. And that's been shown, I think, over time as well. Right. So the more people who can get an education, I think that's absolutely, that's a benefit to society. So, and I think that, as I say, it's not everyone who, there are systems where they say specifically, oh, this person is not up to being at a college, so they can't go. I'm glad that that's not what we have here. I'm glad that you can do it and you can get some help, or a lot of people can. And so the more of that, the better.
I'm all for easy access to higher education. Um, the reason why I ask this is because obviously, there's a lot of prominent Democratic leaders that really advertise or are for free college. And, I agree that free college would be a great thing, but it comes with benefits and costs, which would dilute a lot of majors. So it wouldn't make it as, what's the word, as it wouldn't make it as demand heavy, since the supply is super high for a lot of uh college majors if everything was free. So I for me, I think the reform we need, at least for education, is to make it affordable. And that's why I was totally an Yang Gang, Andrew Yang. I was for him because he was talking about um, college tuition prices. And have you ever looked up how much your tuition goes to, like, funding a football program at, like, a big school? It's like,
I've seen that. I didn't do it for my college, but yes, I've heard it, and it's always distressing that they rely so heavily on the TV revenues or the media revenues generated from sports, college sports, for a lot of colleges and universities. Some of the major universities do that sort of thing.
yeah, it's like 20. If you go to UGA, it's 20% of your tuition.
Yeah,
Isn't that wild?
that's ridiculous.
That's wild. I should not be paying for the football team if I didn't buy a ticket, or I don't care about the football team. I did not come to this school because some people come to UGA for the football team because they're diehard UGA fans and they want to be a part of the experience. Cool. I did not. I did not care. I should not have to pay for your football program if I didn't buy a ticket. I don't watch a single game. I'm not invested. I don't care. My tuition should directly go to education, books, and teacher salary. That's it. That's it. My tuition should not go to the cost of these CEOs and presidents of these schools and their multi-million-dollar mansions and their stupid football programs. Sorry. It shouldn't. And that's what's concerning. And I think that's what's driving the prices of these education programs so far through the roof. I mean, if you look at the quality of education that you're getting for a psychology major in 2021 versus 20 years ago, it's literally not any different. But the cost of tuition has gone up. It's ridiculous. Why? Because in administrative fees, football programs, you got to pay the football coach multi-million-dollar salary. It's like, why does that pressure, that responsibility, fall on me as the student? Why? If you're watching, don't go to big universities. Do not. It's a waste of money. You get the same education at a small program like GDC down the street. Better education, same piece of paper. No football team? Guess what? You're not paying for football team tuitions. You're not doing any of that. Why it's so stupid? Because a capitalist model invades that thing. And again, I'm not anti-capitalist. Love capitalism. Think it's great. Think it's a great model. I think it's a great model for luxuries, things that are luxuries. Amazon, I think it's a great model. Yeah, they're becoming a titan in the industry, and it's sort of looking like a monopoly. I didn't say that, Amazon, so please don't come hover over my bed at night while I'm sleeping, please. But you get the point. I think that there are industries, I think, that benefit from capitalism and not these. Dylan comes out against large colleges and universities. Daydreams attacks college football. Damn right I do.
So the thing with Amazon is I agree that it's grown because it's grown and people like it, people want to use it, people do use it, and that's okay. I think the problem with Amazon is the not paying any taxes when they are part of the society. They use the societal things that are there, the roads, the airways, all that kind of stuff. But because of tax loopholes and stuff, they're able to get out from putting in for it. And that's where it doesn't work. That's not capitalism. That's greed.
So what about the argument that says, and not in a just counter arguments here, Jeff Bezos has done a lot to provide jobs, right? He's worth billions of dollars, literally billions. No one else even compares to him except Elon Musk. But the contribution he has made to society and to the world is that he has provided a good or a luxury that people value and appreciate. And he's provided millions of jobs across the country, not just in warehouses, not just in delivery and mailing packages, but in software tech and streaming services, Amazon Prime. He's opened up several different businesses where employees can have jobs. So in what retrospect do we say, all right, you have done a lot as a contribution? You know, are we still mad at Jeff Bezos? Are we not mad at Jeff Bezos? What's the issue? What's the deal?
Well, Bezos is I'd say don't be mad at him. He's getting away with what he can get away with. But I don't think I don't think his providing jobs alone should absolve him from also putting in to make certain things are taken care of. In other words, he has to pay his fair share. Even if he's providing jobs, that's great. He's certainly not being penalized for that by not paying taxes. I think that what that means is that he's getting away without putting in his fair share in a model, as you were mentioning before, or actually maybe I was saying it. There was a time where businesses were putting in their fair share, and that's how we were able to afford things that we needed. And with them increasingly over these past a couple of decades, or a little more than a couple of decades, getting out of putting in for taxes, you can justify it if you want, but the problem is then that the revenue is not there, and then you look under Bush, you bring in a whole bunch of tax cuts, and then you increase the expenses by starting a couple of wars, and hey, all of a sudden, there's a problem. Gosh, don't have enough money to run the government. Well, what's the problem? Government. Well, no, that was bad policy. You provided tax cuts, removed money from the revenues, and then increased the costs from, like Afghanistan. What was it? $20 billion was going to the Pentagon before that, and now it's something like 600 billion. So,
which is always amazing.
Where's all that money coming from?
That always amazes me. And they say that these billionaires need to pay taxes so we can fund all these programs, but no congressperson, you will never find a congressperson saying I'm taking a pay cut or I'm not taking this paycheck because we're not funding this. We're not funding Social Security properly. And that to me speaks volume. Now, if there was any sort of Congress member on both sides, it doesn't matter. If they said, you know what, I make a six-figure salary, not just a small six-figure salary. Some make upwards of $500,000. If they decided to not take a paycheck in favor or protest of the fact that some of these programs that we find beneficial or we need their basics, Social Security, that to me would be an actionable move. That actions speak louder than words, not to be cliche here, but to me, the problem is not whether people are paying their taxes or not. There's plenty of money in government. If you really want to find money, it's in government.
No, I don't. The reason I don't agree with that is that's a little too gimmicky for my tastes. I think that they are doing a job, they should be paid. I don't think anybody's making $500,000 from their government salary. They might be making money through some other things, but their government salary is whatever it is for a congressperson. I think it's $175K a year. As long as they're paying taxes on that, then you get paid when you do work. So if that's what they get for doing that job, then as long as they're paying taxes, I'm okay with that. So that's part of the idea of taxes is you don't have to give up your paychecks, but you do need to give up something, and you give up a share of that, a small portion or a portion of that. And in doing that, because it's spread out over everyone, when businesses also should contribute, then there's enough to do the things that, then you have a budget, then you work with that. The problem is letting a third of the economy not chip in based on oh, they're a business, we need to make certain that they don't get taxed, means that that's part of where the problem is. Then you say, well, a third of the economy doesn't need to pay taxes. And then you say, well, but the really wealthy, they don't really need to pay taxes, on this fallacy of they're providing jobs, so therefore they're doing their share. No, that just means another portion of the economy that's not kicking in, and then you don't have the revenue to do what you need.
I'm not in disagreement with you. I'm not in disagreement. I think everybody should chip in their fair share. I just think that there is plenty of money in government. I really do. If we wanted to make where our money goes shows where our priorities are.
Absolutely agree with you on that.
That's all I'm saying. I do not think what it's a podcast. Let's go. What's up, Tyler? Waste, fraud, and abuse. Absolutely. Of abuse of money. Is that what you're saying? Because wasn't there something a couple weeks ago with there was something a couple weeks ago with Nancy Pelosi, who popped out and said or her husband was, I guess, caught for insider trading, or not really caught. I guess there was a pharmaceutical company that came out. I don't remember all the details, so I can't speak about it. But all I remember was he took out, or he sold a bunch of his shares before the company announced exactly what they were going to do, and they profited like literally a couple $1 million off. It's just one of the controversies was, how does Nancy Pelosi not know about it? I mean, she's literally in bed with the guy. That's her husband. So for me, it's like I don't like to pick sides, just because I think everybody in those kind of positions, I can't trust it. I really don't. There's just, to me,
I think if that's true, yeah, absolutely, then that needs to be investigated. And if he did the wrong thing, then there needs to be a punishment for that. I certainly don't disagree with that point.
Mm-hmm.
Just like with the New York governor, with the stuff he was doing, he was sexually harassing a number of women. There was an investigation. They found evidence. They put that all together, and sure, he went on about how it was a political thing, but the bottom line is, it was investigated, it was proven, there was evidence. Gotta go.
Well, what amazes me about that situation particularly is the sexual harassment scandal versus, in my opinion, he should have been gone when they found out he was sticking old people in the homes, the senior livings, and sending them back with COVID, and basically, covering that up and then writing a book about it. It's like, well, that didn't get him, but this does. That doesn't make any sense to me. Like, what? That's way worse. Not saying that there's not a difference between the two, or one is worse or not, but I think killing people and sending them back is pretty bad.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And once again, I mean, that was being investigated. I think that, yeah, I agree with you that it's not a one-on-one thing. It's not which one is worse. It's that both of them are wrong, and both of them are a problem, and they were a problem for him. But this was both things got coverage in the media. Both things got the attention of the legislature, but this was the one that one was a buildup and one actually took him down.
Yeah, that's fair. Good point. Like, one sparked the fire, one lit the forest, kind of thing. Oh, you mentioned the media. I mean, it's so weird to watch different news outlets now. It's so weird to go back from Fox and then go to CNN and then flip back and forth between the two, because literally the same story, they'll tell you two different messages. It's just wild. And literally, if it favors one, they're telling you the popularized version, or they're not giving you all the facts. And if it doesn't favor the other, they'll literally tell you everything wrong with it. They'll tell you why, the Democrats are bad. They'll tell you why the Republicans are bad. What the Republicans did, that was sneaky. They'll tell you what the Democrats did, that was snowflakey, or they're ruining the culture. It's like, it makes no sense. It's like it's like we're just trying to win.
it goes back. I think it goes back to that whole concept of it's not a, the fairness doctrine was ditched under Reagan to help lay the groundwork for News Corp to exist, and they took that and they ran with it. And so I don't think that there's an issue of balance so much as the rules changed and somebody took advantage of it, and they've run with it ever since. So it's good PR to say, oh, everything is really balanced and there's a left and a right, and it's an easy message because once again we're back to that whole idea of in general people don't want conflict. There are, and I think that's more the average person, right? You don't want there to be conflict. You don't want to accept, you don't want to talk about politics. You don't want to talk about religion at the dinner table because that will only bring up a conflict. But that's because there's real beliefs that are being looked into and expressed.
See, I actually disagree with that. I think people really want to talk about politics and people thrive off of conflict. I mean, why do stories that are negative in nature get always the most publicity? You never see the guy or the governor that, saved thousands of kids or something like that, or did a good thing on TV. You never see them patting his back or anything like that, or her back. You always see the scandal. People love conflict, and I think that we just don't like being in the conflict. There's a difference. I think we love conflict when it happens to other people, and we love seeing it play out, and that's why news media follow it all the time. Doesn't matter which side it is, they're just following a conflict. And if they can take something positive and spin it into a conflict, then they freaking will. And again, I just don't. I think social media has done a good job of showing this too. People really do like talking about politics, which is why it's become so polarized now. I think it's always been polarized, but now we're kind of seeing it we're seeing it played out a little bit more on a global scale. I think that it's now being overt rather than covert. And before, we just had our little dining room or family room meetings where we could talk, but now that we have social media, we can kind of play this out on a larger scale. We can talk to people in Georgia all the way across in Seattle, Washington. We literally have the broadest viewpoints on the internet, and I think that we're just seeing it played out more overtly.
I certainly would agree that the internet has allowed the access of the greater population being able to interact. That whole sort of Arab Spring thing where you can get the word out in a mass way that's not disrupted by a corporation, and you can get your message out. I do think that, and this is where we disagree. I do think that most people are still sort of want to avoid the conflict. I get your point that it's sort of it's a great hook for the media to use, and they do. And of course, I run a podcast that's based on politics. I like the idea of talking about politics. I like the idea of it being out there. Hey, I'm sure I'd love to have everyone check out PolitiPod and to see what they think about it. But we do it with a particular viewpoint because we are people. We have our opinions, and
right.
That's what we express. I'd rather do that than try to just, as what you were saying. It's probably more sellable to talk about the conflict, and that's what media does in general. But what we do is talk about a particular viewpoint, our viewpoint, because that's who we are. That's what we want to express. And so, sure, we're not going to be as popular as Fox News or New York Times or whatever, but we're gonna do our little humorous show, and hopefully people will enjoy it.
Yeah, no, I mean, you do a fantastic job commentating and making sure that everybody has the facts, the opinions necessary to make their own opinionated judgments about things. It's for it's crazy how something that should bring us together, like coronavirus to me should have been like, hey, this is a pandemic. We need to focus on how to get past this. We need to come together. We may disagree on things, but this is the route we're taking. This is what we need to do to solve the solution. This is a virus. But to not be able to talk about or speculate the origins of the virus, to have something so controversial as whether or not you're going to wear a mask, to make vaccinations mandatory or not, to me, to not be able to talk about those things, to argue on those points and those premises and really create divide, just to me, it's just mind-boggling, because it's like, well, this is life-threatening. This is unprecedented. We really need to talk about this. We need to, now more than ever, if we had an outside threat, this should be the one thing bringing us together. Typically, in all of society, the one thing that brings everybody together, even in terms of conflict, is an outside threat, right? If you're having internal conflict in your country and then another country starts to invade you, creates camaraderie, you get together, you fight because you know that it's what you do to survive. This is completely different. It makes no sense. It makes no sense that, we're so divided on these topics, but we can't even talk about it. Like, you can't even talk about, what you believe or whether or not people want to get vaccinated or not. You can't talk about whether it should be mandatory or not. You can't talk about, before you couldn't talk about the origin of coronavirus. There was speculation. It was considered conspiracy to even remotely infer that it came from a lab. But now it's pretty mainstream. It's like, what? What? Now we can talk about it? Like, why?
Well, what I will say is, you said it was unprecedented, and I don't think it is unprecedented, because the country went through the issue with polio. It wasn't too long ago that there was
That's fair.
There was an illness, and it swept the country, and it was a big problem. And what we didn't have was a political party making an issue of, is this really a hoax, or is this really something that is being done to take away your freedoms? There were massive amounts of iron lung machines that had to be brought in, and kids needed to be put on these iron lungs, and literally in auditoriums, and everybody kind of went, this is serious. We've got to come together. You said there was an outside threat, and people saw it like that, and they got that it was a time to sort of set aside things and set aside differences and to address the real threat, the real problem. And we're not doing that, and that's why things are getting drawn out. So I don't see that becoming I don't see that resolving quickly, but that's where we are.
I think it's a cyclic cycle, and this is why I get so frustrated with sides or teams in this situation, because you'll have people that try and speak up and say, maybe masks are not effective, maybe they are, maybe we should wait on the virus, maybe we shouldn't. And then what happens is, and this is really happening on big platforms like Facebook and YouTube, where people get censored for talking about that stuff and then labeled as medical misinformation. I get the point. I get why it's labeled as medical information. But then it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? It's like, well, I'm not going to let you talk about it because you think it's conspiracy. Well, then when they get censored, they're going to think it's conspiracy. They're going to be like, well, why can't I talk about it? Well, I'm trying to do this for your own good because you're spreading medical and misinformation. Well, are you doing it because I'm spreading medical information? Like, I just want to talk about it. Like, that's a conspiracy. So you have like people pointing fingers back at each other instead of coming together and just talking and saying, hey, this is why you probably shouldn't do that. This is not a conspiracy, I promise. Like, I'm just trying to talk to you about this.
I'm unaware of that. I mean, what I'm aware of is there are, I've watched so many local communities and their county commissions having meetings and having people come with their statements and making their statements and saying these sort of things that are conspiracies and that are sort of, it's a hoax, and
right.
this is being done to try to take away my freedom. And
well, again,
healthcare, the people working in the hospitals wearing the masks for 16-hour days because they have to do double shifts,
right.
They're not doing it for the fun of it. They're not doing it because they want to wear those masks all day long in a double shift for 16 hours. This is not a joke. And if you want to try to make it that so that you can declare, I have a neighbor who sits out on his stoop. I'm in Brooklyn, and the guy next door literally sits down on the stoop here, and there's a supermarket across the street, and he literally starts loud conversations where he's screaming and yelling about the conspiracy of how Q is telling him and has these pictures and information about how this is all a conspiracy for government to control. And I hear this stuff all the time. So when I hear people saying you can't talk about it, well, this guy is, and this guy is doing this for several hours each day.
What?
I see people talking about it at the meetings. I see people taking on healthcare professionals and even holding protests outside of hospitals. So I'm not quite certain how, I don't see how Facebook fact checking somebody and saying, well, this is clearly misinformation and we're going to stop it. I don't see how that's government oppressing the people.
For clarification, it's not specifically government, right? It's not, these big tech companies are not controlled by the government. Correct. But for example, when the coronavirus first came out, because Trump said it possibly came from China, anybody else that would say anything remotely like it leaked in a lab would immediately get called a racist or a bigot and then get canceled. And then later on to see, literally like a month or two ago, like over summer, when now it comes out that mainstream news media outlets are talking about, hey, it could have potentially come from the Wuhan lab in China. This looks like a lot of doctors and researchers, especially particularly on YouTube, were coming out and saying, this does not look like a normal evolutionary path that a virus would have taken. This looks like something that was genetically modified and created in a lab. So a lot of those people got canceled, particularly one of the guy, his name is Brett Weinstein. He's very interesting. He's a very good evolutionary biologist, but he came with the facts and he said, this is not something that I think that is, is not naturally occurring. This looked like something that was genetically modified. But to see that his videos and some of the people and the arguments and some of the researchers that would come out against this before it became mainstream getting censored because it was considered conspiracy or called racist or bigoted or anything like that, to watch that happen and watch that unfold only gives more fuel to the opposition to say, aha, it is conspiracy. You are trying to cover this up. Aha. So it's like, it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in my head when I see those things happen. It's like, instead of coming and talking about it and maybe allowing people to actually have discussion.
Yeah, I'd agree. Where I can agree on that is with the same thing that happened to the CDC, who were making decisions based on as the best information they had at the time.
Right.
And they would make a decision, and one side would go crazy, and then they'd do something because things had changed. They'd say, okay, here's another thing, here's a new fact, we've got to take it, and we've got to do what we can only do what we can do based on what's happening in front of us.
Right.
And they would say something slightly different, and the other side would go, oh no, this is horrible, and all that kind of thing. So yeah, I would agree with you on that. I'd agree that it's tough because facts can change things.
Yeah.
And you gotta be willing to have enough flexibility to be able to acknowledge that, to be able to say, yeah, okay, sometimes some things change, and you gotta go with it.
Well, I think facts can change things, but people's affinity towards the facts can also change things. I think two people can look at two different statistics and literally see two different things, even though the facts are themselves not any remotely sided towards one political party. Just your affinity towards a subject can severely modify your perception of it. And I think that affinity, looking at, whether or not the coronavirus has a high or low death rate, doesn't matter what it is, but you can look at it and say, oh, well, it doesn't affect me. It doesn't have a low death rate. But then, if you look at it on the other end of the spectrum, like literally just coronavirus death rate, right? Let's just take that, for example. Literally, we had people like spouting it as a conspiracy theory and saying that, we shouldn't take this seriously. They're just trying to take away our freedoms. You literally have one end of the spectrum saying that. Then the other end of the spectrum is like, this is Armageddon. We need to like close up shop. We don't need to go out. We don't need to do anything. It's like, well, we need to find a middle ground. We need to really figure this thing out. Yes, it didn't have a low death rate, but the reason why we were shutting businesses down and, taking this so seriously is because, again, this got lost in the media for some reason, is because it would overwhelm the healthcare system if too many people got it. People would end up on ventilators, and it would exacerbate other conditions if for some reason they didn't, if they were taking up too many beds. If you had pneumonia and someone came in with coronavirus and all the other beds were, filled up with coronavirus, but, you needed that ventilator, it really puts a strain on the healthcare system. And so, again, you had people saying, oh my gosh, the death rate is nothing. Why are we worrying about this? They're just trying to take away our freedoms. And then you have the other side saying, oh my gosh, this is Armageddon. This is a pandemic. We need to make sure everybody is safe. We need to close down shop. It's like,
well,
let's figure this out. Let's work together.
I don't know about the balance thing, but I will say that it's like vaccines. People needed to get the vaccine because it was a benefit that helped you. It kept you. It keeps you. It doesn't prevent you from getting COVID,
right?
But it does make you
weaken your symptoms.
Makes your immunization so that you are able to fight it better, so that you don't have to go to the hospital, so that you don't have to be intubated,
right?
So that you don't take up a bed in the hospital. And so it's not only worth doing because it makes you healthier, it's important to do because, as you were pointing out, the healthcare system gets overwhelmed. And we're seeing that in a number of states where the beds are so full that people coming in for emergency care can't get it quickly because things are filled up.
Coronavirus is taking over. And that argument makes sense to me. And I think that would make a sense to a lot of people. The way you phrase that, the way you worded it, everything about that seems a lot better than just saying, get the vaccine. That doesn't do any good. What are you anti-vaxxers waiting for? Get the vaccine. You're the problem. It's like the way you phrased it is how it should have been phrased. Like that to me seems like the most logical, sensible way to phrase that problem. Because you're highlighting an importance of getting it. You're not going to not get the virus. In the likelihood of you getting it, still pretty high. It's not going to prevent you from getting the virus, but it'll keep you out of the hospital. And that's what we need right now. We need to keep people out of the hospital because our healthcare system cannot handle it. So the vaccine is not going to stop it, but it can at least help our healthcare system.
I agree with you and me.
Yeah. Right. I think that you worded that the best way. Like that to me, we're going to clip that, guys. This is how we get people to take vaccines. That's it right there.
Right.
But Matt, thank you for coming on tonight. I really appreciate it. This has been a very, very fun episode. I love talking about politics, especially with people that have their own sets of opinions and are willing to share those and not, again, start conflict over it. I mean, you have done a fantastic job of articulating your ideas and your thoughts, and you do more of that on your podcast, PolitiPod?
PolitiPod. Now,
all right, I just wanted to make sure I said it, not PolitiPod. PolitiPod, okay.
It is. Well, and do keep in mind, check out PolitiPod. It's soundcloud.com/PolitiPod. Okay. And you'll see this symbol. Oh, where is it there? Over there. You'll see that symbol with it. And it is political humor. So the idea is there's about a dozen of us on this podcast. We write it up. We do sketches. We do one-liners. We also take a minute or two each episode to let folks know when elections are happening, because sometimes the local and state elections don't get the press that the big national ones do. So you'd be surprised. Every single week there's an election somewhere going on in America.
Really?
And most folks don't know that. So we try to also take just a minute or two to say, hey, there's something going on here, and here. People there, let them know so they can vote, because that's important too. But it's overall, this is it's a podcast about political humor and making fun of stuff.
Perfect.
So come on over and enjoy some humor.
Dell, I think you would enjoy his podcast a lot. So make sure you guys head over there, subscribe, follow the podcast. I'm going to post your link in the description of this video. So if you could send me a link following up, and I think you already sent me a link. I'm sorry. And Matchmaker, where the podcasters, again, that's the worst name they gotta name that website, especially as a married guy going on Matchmaker. Yeah, does not sound like a podcast finding guest website at all. So, well, Mr. Matt, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate your giving me the opportunity to speak with you and to speak to folks who are watching. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm going to keep you here for just a few minutes. Everybody, thank you. Again, make sure you guys follow Matt, and his link will be in the description of the YouTube video. So make sure you guys go down there. Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. Thank you for daydreaming. I'll see you guys next week.